I want to talk today about emancipation in the context of Juneteenth, Pride Month, even Father's Day. Emancipation is a word that means setting free. It can mean being set free, or it can mean setting someone else free. I like to think of Jesus as the ultimate emancipator in his words from John 8:32. You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. That's what emancipation is about, setting free, being set free. And I think that theme is definitely present in our reading today and also at the intersection of the observances that we're doing this month. Yesterday, I spoke at Juneteenth service, an event in San Rafael, and then I went from there. I did 3 bridges yesterday. I feel I should get some kind of pin for that. And then I went from there to Belmont, this church where we had our annual Pride service. It was only our second one. And the themes of Juneteenth and Pride Day felt merged to me, but I do think that they are closely related. Juneteenth, it's a national holiday now. It's not necessarily, it's observed as a national holiday, but it's not observed in the same way in every part of the country. So I remind us that this is still a country where in some places, and I've lived in these places, that Confederacy Day is still observed in place of Martin Luther King Day. Juneteenth commemorates a historical event on this day, June 19th, 1865, when the end of slavery that was proclaimed first by Abraham Lincoln in the Confederate States, not in the Union States. The end of slavery in 1863 on January 1st was proclaimed or signed into law. But that word didn't drift everywhere, and Texas did not get the news until June 19th, 1865, so 2.5 years later. And it was a complicated part of American history, and I certainly didn't learn it growing up in school. I had to learn it as an adult, but the complexities of it. But the simple fact is that slavery was legal in this country in many places until 1863, and then it wasn't until 1865 that it was formally decreed over. And there are many nuances to it that I've learned about Juneteenth over the years. I'm wearing my Juneteenth t-shirt from when I was in Duluth, living and working in Duluth a few years ago, where Juneteenth was observed not only because it was an important historical event about the end of slavery, or the formal end of slavery, but also as an important day of resistance, resilience against white supremacy and against the ongoing reality of racism. Duluth was a city that had had a lynching in living memory of some of the people who were still alive. And when I was working there, it was just in a few years after the death of George Floyd. And this is the difference between how Duluth and St. Paul and Minneapolis observed it. People in Duluth generally, which was a 98% white city, way up at the top on Lake Superior, thought that George Floyd had broken the law, and therefore what happened to him was certainly not a good thing, but he did violate the law. And that's very different from how people in St. Paul and Minneapolis were experiencing it. The acquittal of the police officer of first-degree murder charges, all those things. For black people living in Duluth, and I was part of the NAACP chapter there, it has a 1.5% black population, I think, in Duluth. So very different from our context here. Juneteenth wasn't just about the past. It was about how it feels in the present and what it means to be resistant and resilient in the presence. And faith was definitely a big part of Juneteenth. Originally, Juneteenth, other places I lived in, yesterday in San Rafael, that same theme was emphasized. This isn't just about a historical commemoration. Many of the circumstances of structural racism still exist in our country. And so Juneteenth was a rallying cry and an invitation to people who do not experience racism to be in solidarity with those who do. In the United Church of Christ, anti-racism work is an important dimension of our identity. So Juneteenth is really a holy day. When the governor said, or the general said in Texas in 1863, the people of Texas are informed that in accordance with a proclamation from the executive of the United States, all slaves are free. This involves an absolute equality of personal rights and rights of property between former masters and slaves, and the connection heretofore existing between them becomes that between employee and hired labor. The freedmen are advised to remain quietly at their present homes and work for wages. They are informed that they will not be allowed to collect at military posts, and they will not be supported in idleness, neither here or elsewhere. So even that proclamation came with a lot of controls about where even freed black people were allowed to congregate and be. But I lift this up because in church, I think in the United Church of Christ, at a congregational church, a peninsula, a church like ours, these historical remembrances are an invitation for us to be in active solidarity as part of our faith with anti-racism work in the present, and to be aware of how things resonate differently in different communities. I'm preaching next Sunday at the Congregational Church in Berkeley, with whom I had a long history when I was a pastor in Berkeley and a campus pastor, and I've preached there before. And I remember preaching there about 12, 13, 14 years ago. So this happened on a Saturday night. The guy who killed Trayvon Martin in Florida was acquitted of first-degree murder, and it happened on a Saturday night that the jury announced their decision. And I was preaching the next morning at the First Congregational Church in Berkeley and at City of Refuge United Church of Christ, also in Oakland, which is a black Pentecostal United Church of Christ congregation that I have a long history with. And here was the thing, the contrast. So you couldn't have prepared for this as a preacher. And both events were very high profile in our country at that time, or that event was. So at the 11 o'clock service at the largely white Congregational Church in Berkeley, which is a liberal church, very liberal, people were sort of saying the same thing. Well, it's unfortunate, but it's how our system works. And there was a jury trial. He was acquitted. So it's partly really about law and order. And I'm not saying that they felt good about that, but that's kind of how, that was the prevailing notion. An hour later, I'm in this black Pentecostal church in Oakland where the whole service was like this, a wail of lament, of fear, of anger about the injustice that had been perpetrated orderly and according to law. These two congregations, close together in the same denomination, different demographically and different in how they experience racism. It could not have been a stronger contrast, and it deeply imprinted on me the need for congregations like ours to be aware of and in solidarity with congregations like City of Refuge, United Church of Christ in Oakland, as part of our faith, not our politics, our faith. So, emancipation, it's a historical, political event. I also think it has an additional meaning. It is a spiritual act as well, a faith act, a metaphysical act. It's something that only we can do for ourselves, that others cannot do for us. And I've learned over my years of study and in community organizing and community work that it's very important, not that this nuance is important, to say that Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves. There's a political meaning to that. But what black scholars and black faith leaders have taught us to say is black people had been saving and freeing themselves a long time before the government said it was all right. That there is an internal process for people who are living under oppression in which they will not submit to external acts of oppression, even if they are required to, that there is some part of us, our soul, our spirit, that cannot be touched by those things, and that impulse needs to be nurtured. There are some things that only we can do, that even when we can't control the politics. Frederick Douglass said this in 1850, "Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did and it never will. Find out just what people will quietly submit to, and you have found out the exact measure of injustice and wrong which will be imposed upon them. And these will continue until they are resisted with either words or blows, or with both. The limits of tyrants are prescribed by the endurance of those whom they oppress." Occasions like this remind us that emancipation, setting free, isn't just something that some people do for others. It is something that we have power, agency in, and can do ourselves. There's an Episcopal priest named Polly Murray, who died a few years ago now, but she was one of they called them the Philadelphia 11. This is when I was in college in the 1970s. A group of women who were Episcopal priests, who were not yet Episcopal priests, they didn't allow women to be clergy in the Episcopal Church, decided to have their own ordination ceremony. And they had it at an Episcopal church, the Church of the Advocate, in a black neighborhood in Philadelphia. They calculated carefully where they were having it, and they had their own ordination. And they broke the rules, but it led to the change in the Episcopal Church that allowed women to become priests eventually. Polly Murray was African American. She was a lawyer also, as well as a priest. And reflecting back on her life, this is what she said: "Nobody gave me my freedom. I owe it to no political power or party or to the goodwill of any group. Some of it my forefathers fought for at Appomattox, Petersburg, and Richmond. Others toiled at Carolina tobacco fields, paying their masters dollar for dollar, and bought their freedom. The Proclamation of Emancipation in 1863 was but the historical and documentary recognition of an accomplished fact." And I believe it's important for us to first be familiar with this history as people in our country at a time when racism still is a problem, a big problem, and also to recognize that when we do that, it frees us up then to look at other ways that emancipation is an important spiritual act. I think about emancipation in regard to men who are struggling to live in a different way than men had been socialized to live, to be fathers that are different from some of the ways that fathers had been taught, to not express emotion, or to be stern disciplinarians and not necessarily attentive to matters of the heart. That isn't true everywhere, but it is a stereotype, and I think there isn't a man alive who won't say that we were socialized into certain patterns from which we wish to be set free. Others can set us free. We also must set ourselves free. And on Father's Day, I wanted to say that emancipation has kind of a personal meaning. We can be different from the ways we were raised. We can break patterns, and we need support to do it, but it is possible for us to do. I think that this is at the heart of what Jesus is saying in this passage 2,000 years ago. Sometimes, we use the present to read the past, and sometimes the present illumines the present. Sometimes the past illumines the present. When Jesus starts out this passage in a context where economic slavery was permitted and allowed, he says, "A disciple is not above a teacher, nor a slave above a master." He casts a very specific egalitarian vision of a world in which equality is the way that we are being called into. Now, the Bible, there have been different versions of the Bible presented to people. I was reminded of this yesterday at the Juneteenth observance by Bishop Flunder when she told us about the story of how there were slave Bibles in the United States. And you can see them. I've seen one, actually. They were versions of the Bible that slave owners made available to the enslaved people. And they took out any references to freedom. They were much shorter. And they also emphasized the parts of the Bible that approved of slavery and were used to justify slavery, including slaves, obey your masters, things like that. So that's one way. Those things are in the Bible, but these things are also in the Bible. The very words that have been used to oppress often contain keys to liberation, too. And Jesus casts a vision of an egalitarian world. Slavery in the 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th century was race-based. It was economically based in the first century. But the principle is the same. We don't own people. People don't own people. We are equal one another in God's sight. And then Jesus also has words that have given hope to oppressed people throughout time. What you say, what I say to you in the dark, tell in the light. What you hear whispered, proclaim from the housetops. Do not fear those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Fear the one who destroys both soul and body in hell. I'll take out the last verse and deal with that later sometime. But Jesus saw in us a power that is greater than those who exercise power, sometimes in society, a power to self-determine, a power to speak out and to proclaim our own liberation even before others see it. These verses were very important, even in my own community growing up, not growing up, but when I was coming out as an adult, living in New York City in the 1970s. I belonged to a Catholic religious group called Dignity. And we were not part of any church structure, but we were gay Catholics. And we met in people's homes on Saturday night privately because we were not welcome in church and were told that we couldn't receive communion. But we organized these services on Saturday nights in people's apartments. And this is before the internet, before other ways of organizing. You had, as we would say, you have to come one week to find out where we'll be next week. And people came. It got larger and larger and larger. Then we rented a Presbyterian church because they didn't care, because we were Catholics. So it was easy for them to let us be there. And then a Jesuit church in New York, St. Francis Xavier on 16th Street, took a risk and let us meet there, and it grew to over 1,000 people. And then the church cracked down on it and said, no, you can't meet anymore. But what was important was this. We believed that though the church had closed the doors and turned its back on us, God wanted us to know that we were of, as Jesus says, more value than many sparrows. And the things that at first we whispered about, we learned to proclaim out loud, publicly. When we spoke our truth about how it's okay to be gay and Christian, it wasn't just speaking to bishops. Really, the impact was the effect it had on us. We changed, and we were no longer willing to submit to oppression. Our own self-respect and self-esteem changed, and it made us stronger people in our lives and stronger in our faith. These are the themes I want to lift up for us on Juneteenth, in Pride Month, in our own spiritual lives. What is it that we can change? What is it that we want to be set free from? What truths do we need to speak not only to ourselves, but to others, so that we and the whole world can be free? Jesus said, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." Amen.